Good morning. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living in Bellingham. My name is Andrea Wood. I'm the intern practitioner of the day. Our senior minister is Dr. Andrea Asebedo. Please join me in prayer. In the knowing, there is one divine presence. This presence lives in and through all of creation. This is Spirit. Spirit embraces all. All sacred humans are interconnected with Spirit all over the world at our core. Whatever is showing up in the world and in our lives, I have a knowing that Spirit is there. Spirit is present as unconditional love. Spirit is present as compassion. And Spirit is present as vibrant life. I affirm for all sacred humans our whole and loving nature. I am so grateful that this is true, and I release my word to Spirit, knowing it is so, and so it is. I would now like to introduce Dr. Andrea Asebedo, who will speak on loving what is.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everybody. Well, we are in interesting times, aren't we? Ooh, pandemic, or is it pandemonium? Let me see my... There we go. Hi, everyone. There. All right, so pandemonium and pandemic have the same root word, which is pan, which means all, and dem, which means demons. Mm-hmm. So you may be feeling, as I do, that there's been some demons on the loose lately, and I wanted to speak today about loving what is as a way of restoring sanity, which is our monthly topic in our yearly theme of who do we choose to be. What I have to say really is that this is where the spiritual rubber meets the road. We've been doing spiritual practices, we've been doing spiritual study, we've been doing spiritual mind treatments, we've been doing all sorts of things, hopefully for quite a while. And now is the time where all of that practice needs to come into play to create, rather than pandemonium, pan-harmony, a harmony among all humankind. So how do we do that? And we start with ourselves always. So I wanted to read you from Pema Chodron, from her book, Welcoming the Unwelcome. And in the chapter called Beyond the Comfort Zone, she says, the more willing you are to step out of your comfort zone, the more comfortable you will feel in your life. She goes on and says, whenever we are between here and there, whenever one thing is ended and we're waiting for the next thing to begin, whenever we're tempted to distract ourselves or look for an escape route, we can instead let ourselves be open, curious, tentative, and vulnerable. Now the thing is, you probably are already feeling vulnerable, right? And certainly tentative. If you're like me, I just got back from San Francisco, where the entire city is pretty much locked down. And in our own Bellingham, things are closing down, public spaces are closed, we're all seeking to flatten the curve. We've learned all kinds of new uses for words like staying fluid and being open to what is. So I wanted to remind you of a couple things that you probably already know, but just in case you need the reminder, I wanted to show you a graphic from an educational group called PassageWorks. They're in Boulder, Colorado, and they talk about change and how change can be so important and yet difficult. So they start out with a graph like this that's your comfort zone. And we all know what the comfort zone is. This is when, we have everything set, everything's in place, we have our favorite kind of tea, we have our favorite YouTube on, we have a warm whatever across our laps, and we're just simply being in that zone. And comfort zones are where human beings really like to stay. The problem with a comfort zone is that very little growth happens in a comfort zone over time. And if we don't allow ourselves to move out of it, it actually shrinks. The comfort zone shrinks with time, over time, and becomes smaller and smaller so that we're comfortable with less and less. So there's another layer that we need to add, and it's called the learning layer. The learning zone. The learning zone involves a certain amount of discomfort. It's the place where we actually have to step out of what we're used to be able to invite something new into our experience. Right now, we're all in a learning zone because we're all learning about how to flatten the curve of the pandemic, how to stay safe, what social distancing is, how long you have to wash your hands. All these things are new information for a lot of us. And so there's a lot of learning going on, which is great, right? Right? Except that everything else that we use when we're learning simple things like that we would normally have at our beck and call to feel comfortable, a lot of those things have been shut off for us. A lot of us are working from home. We don't have the social interaction of our work. A lot of us are not coming to the center and not going to social gatherings and not doing a lot of the things that actually allow us to feel comfortable while we're learning. And so to understand how to do this, I'm going to tell you in a minute, there's a couple steps we can take that will help. The last identifiable layer from PassageWorks it's called the extreme risk zone. And the extreme risk zone is a difficult place. Some of us may actually feel like we're in this zone because when extreme risk happens, learning stops, comfort stops. We're in a fight or flight situation. And so the brain is not capable really of taking in a lot of information. Its only concern is, how do I be safe? How do I be safe? How do I be safe? When people try to push themselves past the learning zone and are pushing themselves, either, I'm thinking of in exercise, I go to a gym on a regular basis, although not right now. I've watched people push themselves beyond their physical limit and actually hurt themselves. And in a very real sense, at a spiritual, emotional, and psychological level, if we push ourselves too hard to be beyond what we know, we can actually end up sort of having a rebound effect and needing to kind of turtle in here to the comfort zone, pull the covers over our head, and oftentimes it slows our ability to learn at a critical point when actually learning is what we need to be doing. So how do we move from the comfort zone into the learning zone and back in a way that will be effective for us, so that we can work with the ever-changing nature of what we're surrounded by right now? It's a good question, and so I wanted to bring to you some teachings from one of my favorite current teachers in our Western world. Her name is Byron Katie. Byron Katie had a spontaneous enlightenment experience. She was extremely depressed to the point where she was not able to function, and her insurance would only cover her going into an eating disorder clinic that was residential. So off she went. It was a really difficult experience, but in the middle of that, she had a spontaneous illumination experience, which out of that has produced this huge body of work. And all of it is online and all of it is free. So if you're interested in doing what she calls the work, you can download all the worksheets, you can work with those. There are people that have been trained in helping people to do the work. You can call them or email them and they will help you work through the worksheets. But what I want to bring you is one of the core concepts in her illumination experience. What she realized is that the only time sacred humans suffer is when we argue with reality. It's the only time we suffer. And so she began to pay attention to simply what is. Not what we want, not what we think, but what is. And in that space, there's an incredible opening to the indwelling, basic goodness that we all carry within us. This basic goodness, call it what you will, I call it spirit within. This basic goodness is vast and available if we are. And so her techniques help us to become more readily available in the learning zone to the place inside of us that's vast, that knows exactly what we should be doing, what the next right step should be. So she posited some questions that I want to talk to you about. One of the things that she wanted people to realize is that the mind, that is the thinking part of our experience, often latches on to a thought and believes that that thought is the only reality, when in fact that's not necessarily the case. So let's use an example. I'm going to use the example of you have the thought, let's say, that your partner is falling out of love with you. Okay? Now, if you have that thought, what the mind does with that thought is it begins to gather evidence to support the thought. So if your spouse doesn't kiss you on his or her way out the door, there's evidence. See, they're falling out of love with me. If they go to bed and they just go to sleep, see, they're falling out of love with me. They don't want to be intimate. If they want to read the paper at the breakfast table, see, they don't care about me anymore. And that evidence begins to build to support the premise that we thought up in our little old minds that isn't necessarily true, but it could be. So since the mind is geared this way, Byron Katie said to start asking questions of ourselves when we have a troubling thought. If we have a thought of suffering in some way. So the first question that she recommends we ask is, is this thought true? Now, if you're like me, I want to say immediately, yes, it's true. Of course it's true. So the second question is very valuable for those of us that are a little bit stubborn about what truth is. The second question is, do you know absolutely for certain that that thought is true? And of course, 99.9% of the time, we really don't know absolutely for certain that it's true. We just think it is. So between those two questions, we're questioning, we're beginning to witness the thought that the mind has been gathering evidence to support that is causing us suffering. So is it true? Do you know absolutely for certain that it's true? And then she goes on and says, so how does this thought make me react? Let's take the thought, my spouse is falling out of love with me. Well, it's an interesting thing. You know, a thought like that makes us react in kind of ways that would be counterproductive to someone falling in love with us, right? I mean, the standard thought of someone doesn't love me anymore is falling out of love with me is we try harder. And so we become needy, we become grasping, we become insecure, we become victim-y, and nobody likes to be around that kind of stuff, right? So what we do is we challenge ourselves to say, well, my reaction when I have a thought like that is I become needy, I become insecure, I become frightened. And then the last thought, there's only 4, the last question to ask is, and who would I be without this thought? So let's say you're suffering in some way with the pandemic. Maybe you're terrified that you've been exposed to the coronavirus 19. Or let's say you're suffering because the schools have been closed for a whole month and your kids are at home and you don't know how you're going to work, and so you're very frightened about how to juggle all of life now that everything has changed. So the question we would ask is thought of fear true? Do I need to be afraid? Do I absolutely for certain know that I need to be afraid right now? And how do I react when I have frightened thoughts? What happens to me? And what would happen if I didn't have that thought? Who would I be without it? Without fear? Without frightened thoughts? What would it be like? And in this way, we begin a process of letting the mind gather evidence to support a different idea, a different way of thinking about things, a way that at least provides kind of an option for us. And especially that last question, who would you be without that thought? That question has served me well time and time again, because what happens for me is when I'm suffering, my world kind of shrinks. And as it shrinks, the mind keeps gathering evidence to support the thought that's causing me suffering. And I'm now shrinking with lots and lots of evidence to support an idea. And I can't see any other possibility after a time. My mind simply becomes so completely focused on the thought that I've been having that all the other possibilities are gone. Which is really unfortunate, because actually, when we begin to ask questions like, do we know this thought is true? Are we absolutely certain it's true? How am I reacting to that thought? Noticing the suffering. And then who would I be without the thought? Noticing what quality I would be expressing if I didn't have that thought. Usually people say things like free, peaceful. I would be loving. I would be able to relax. I would be stress-free. Things like that. So what's great about this process for me is in the science of mind, what we know is that our mind, aside from gathering evidence, is extremely creative. And in order to create a reality that is a reality that we're not suffering in, we need to have a bigger vision of what that would look like. So that last question is a clue for us. The clue of, well, if I don't have that thought, then I would be free. That's the start of a new creative process for us in terms of how we allow the mind to work with thought in a different direction. It kind of provides a different angle, and then the mind begins to gather evidence, if we allow it to, about how we actually are peaceful, or how we actually are free, or how we are able to be stressless if we really wanted to do that. It's powerful stuff, but it's so simple that a lot of people kind of forget and just allow the mind to do its gathering of evidence to support a suffering idea. So that's all good. And I really invite you to begin to use that, particularly right now when so many people are suffering in their minds and in their experience because of that. To begin to find a bigger idea of what could possibly be happening here is the clue for me, is the way to go. And so I'm reminded of a story that I've told before. It's a story about a time sort of like this, when people were extremely demoralized, and this motivational speaker had been invited to come and meet with a small group of salespeople because their sales had tanked, sort of like right now, and they weren't sure how to meet the crisis, and they were feeling very demoralized, very victimized by the circumstances. And so the motivational speaker came in, had asked for a whiteboard like this, and said, all right, now I'm just going to do this for a minute. What do you see? And every single person said, well, a black dot. And the speaker said, well, what about all the white space? What about all the white space? And that's what Byron Katie's process is teaching, is, hey, we could have the suffering thought, but what about all the other possible ideas that we could be investing ourselves in? What about the white space? And for me, the white space is a place of deep possibility. And it's ever present. Just like all of this here, if you think about your life right now, you have a lot of white space, but you might not be focused on it. I happened to have the opportunity over this last week to be in Carmel by the Sea, California, in a house that was directly on Carmel Beach. And so all day, I got to hold my granddaughter and look out the picture windows at the waves crashing and the seagulls flying and the crows playing in the wind and the people running by and the dogs sniffing. And, you know, for me, that was my white space. That was the place where I put my mind and said, this is all just as true as everything else. And all over the world, there's beauty happening everywhere. And we can focus on the difficulty, or instead we can acknowledge that this is a very unusual time and begin to focus on the white space of our own experience. Really beginning to recalibrate ourselves, to pay attention more to the larger picture of what's possible. Because I don't believe that this is random. I actually don't believe that the pandemic is a random occurrence. In the science of mind, we actually don't think anything is random. And so our unique response to a global societal experience determines in large part not only what our life will take on as a trajectory, but it also influences all the people that we're connected to in mind and also as we share back and forth. And so for me, focusing on the possibilities, focusing on what is happening, focusing on what I can do, focusing on thoughts that don't create suffering is a very powerful first step in utilizing what's happening for the benefit of self and all others. There's no question that this is a very unusual and extreme kind of situation for us. And so to take our spiritual understanding and to use the mind creatively rather than allowing it to gather evidence to keep us in fear is a very powerful utilization of what we have as a tool in our spiritual toolbox, the creative mind, the ability to create reality out of what we deeply hold and think and believe. So what are you deeply thinking? What are you believing? What are you involving your mind with? And is it something that you want to keep doing? And if not, then I'm inviting you to take a bigger look at your very own reality, to look out into what the white space is for you, not only in the outer world, but the inner world. One of the things that I also have been doing to invite myself to a larger possibility for sacred humans, the earth, and everything, is I've been doing meditation, a very powerful practice. Now, what I noticed is right at first when I started to meditate, when the pandemic was first kind of showing up in global consciousness, what I noticed is my mind wanted to play with that. In meditation, I wanted to go and I wanted to hypothesize and think about and blah, 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 blah with it. And so it took a while for me to bring my mind to a place of settling. But once I was in a place where the mind could calm down and simply be right here, right now, not going anywhere, not doing anything, just right here, it became apparent that the basic goodness, that vast indwelling presence, hadn't gone anywhere, that it was still completely there, completely available, and was basically awaiting my instruction on how I would utilize it, how I would be with it. So I've chosen a path that may to some people seem naive. I've chosen the path of hope. I've chosen the path of faith. I've chosen the path of positivity in the midst of a difficult situation. And yet, for me, that has allowed me to drop away from suffering, from fear, and open to what could possibly be that I can offer, that I can be a part of. So I have a favorite poem that I want to close with, and then I'll do a prayer. If you've been listening to the podcast, you may have heard this poem, because it is one of my favorites. It's by a poet named William Stafford, and it's a very important poem for our time. It's called A Ritual to Read to Each Other. So I want you to listen to this poem. I know not everybody likes poetry, but at a time like this, this is instruction. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world. And following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood storming out to play through the broken dike. As elephants parade, holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual lives get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes, no, or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. I'm speaking to you because you're awake. And I encourage you to use that creative mind of yours, that incredible power that you have, to visualize and work with thoughts that hold that this is happening and unfolding us in the direction we've been longing to go, not in the direction we've been fearing. So please join me in a prayer and we'll close. Know with me as I know. There is one infinite intelligence and love that pervades all reality, that is within and through all people, all species, all that is. This intelligence and love is operating through me and through you right now. I release from my mind and my heart any idea that would limit my view of the possibles available in the intelligent mind of love that dwells within me. Fear has no room in me. Instead, I allow love to be my guide and intelligence to be my way. I make wise choices that allow me to keep myself safe and others safe, and at the same time allow me to visualize and create new opportunities for my own growth and for the support of all others. In this way, my creative mind at work is supporting me through this very unique time in ways that are sure to propel me spiritually emotionally, psychologically, and in every way forward. I am so grateful to be reminded that this intelligence is at work right now, that love is my way, and I release my word, knowing that this prayer is active in me and anyone who chooses it. And so it is. Now I have just two announcements for you. You normally don't hear announcements on our podcasts and on Facebook Live, but here they are. We are offering 2 different online classes coming up. One of them is a history class called From Whence We Came. It will be offered via Zoom, and if you would like to take that class, you can sign up by emailing us at info@csl-bellingham.org and letting us know you would be interested in being part of that class. We'll email you the information. In addition, there's a class that I'm putting together now in response to what's happening. And next Sunday, I'll announce what that class is, when it will be meeting, and for how long. And it too will be offered via Zoom, so you can sign in and be part of an interactive class with me as well. I wish you health and peace.